Lynette. How many people do we have now? Let's see.
We have 21 so far. We're expecting 40, but at this point, I think in keeping with the time schedule that we promised everyone and not wanting to take up Senator Morrison's time, we'll probably begin.
Okay, let's do that then. Good morning. I'm Lori Rose, President of the League of Women Voters of the Lake Forest Lake Bluff area, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our virtual 2020 legislative update with State Senator Julie Morrison. Educating voters is a critical part of our mission. In a typical year, a contingent from our local league would gather in Julie's office to pose a series of questions regarding the legislative session. This year, as we continue to operate virtually during COVID-19, we're pleased to welcome Senator Morrison to our homes and offices via Zoom. Please note that this program will be recorded. At this time, you might want to make sure your Zoom settings are on speaker rather than gallery view in order to focus on our speaker. Our format today will include introductory remarks by Senator Morrison, as well as an opportunity for her to answer questions from our members. League Board Member Lynette Foss, whom you've already met, she chairs our League Communications Committee, and she'll pose previously submitted questions to Senator Morrison. If our program does not provide sufficient time for all questions, Senator Morrison's office will provide follow-up via email. Julie Morrison currently represents the 29th District in the Illinois State Senate. Like her predecessor, Susan Garrett, she's both a League member and a Lake Forest resident. Her work and passions align with many of our League positions. Armed with a degree in political science, Julie entered public service through an appointment to the DCFS Advisory Council and worked for years to improve and reform DCFS. She was elected as West Deerfield Township Supervisor in 1997 and served in that capacity until early 2013. Following her election to the Illinois State Senate in 2013, she worked within several bipartisan groups, including the Children's Health Caucus, where she served as a founding member, the Special Needs Caucus, and the Human Services Committee. Within the Illinois Senate, Julian is currently a member of the Public Health, Agriculture, Environment, Conservation, and Transportation Committees. Our League action foci for this year include healthcare and mental health. Julie has supported mental health care parity laws. She's also been a proponent of League priorities, such as fair maps and redistricting, strong and enforceable gun safety legislation, and term limits for Illinois Senate leadership positions. Most recently, Senator Morrison has been working to champion voting rights, a priority near and dear to the heart of our League, as lead sponsor of Senate Bill 1863, a major expansion of voting access for the November 3rd general election. For those of you who haven't followed this issue, SB 1863 requires local election authorities to mail or email vote-by-mail applications to any voter who cast a ballot in 2018, 2019, or 2020, as well as voters who registered or changed addresses after the March 2020 primary. And now, without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce State Senator Julie Morrison. Thank you, Julie.
Thanks, Lori. And I'm really sorry we can't all be together. I always look forward to getting a group of women in my office where we always go way over time, but it's usually my fault because we always have really good conversations and I take away a lot more than I ever expect to from those get-togethers. But I'm here this morning, and before we get into the legislation and some of the official things, I have to tell you that my dog is completed. I was lucky enough to get a dog for Lake Bluff. Art Impact in downtown Lake Bluff provided an amazing high school artist from Waukegan High School. And my dog is out there on Scranton Avenue. So when you're downtown Lake Bluff, go over and say hi to Artie, because we had to name him. And he's very unique and really kind of captures the time period of COVID-19 that we're in, like only a teenager can do. So anyway, but thanks to the club, the Lake Bluff Club, I found out about the dog at a meeting and got right on the stick and ordered one. So anyway, that's that. Would you like me just to begin with the questions, Lori, or are we going to do this a more moderated way? How do you want to? You provided some questions to
Well,
me.
we thought that you might want to do a brief précis of what you've been up to in the last term, maybe a little bit, sort of in the room where it happened for SB 1863, and then start with some questions, if that's okay.
Sure. So we had a obviously really unusual, very truncated session in Springfield. It was probably mid-February when I decided that vote by mail was something that we got to look at. I was talking to people in other parts of the country, and it seemed like a good idea. I didn't realize it was going to catch fire the way it did. So when we had to adjourn our session so prematurely, it really became a little bit more of an effort to try to coordinate between all the different interest groups, the stakeholders, everybody from league members to clerks, county clerks who actually did the work, to election experts, people who have studied election patterns and different voting. It was a different way to actually try to facilitate what this bill was going to look like. So originally, I had grand ideas of having everything paid for, so that there would not be the hesitation of somebody like, oh, I don't have a stamp, I hate going to the post office, I don't want to do that. I wanted everything to be prepaid. Well, that was pretty quickly blown out of the water. No, we don't have the money for that. We don't want to do that. That sounds too hard. So like a lot of good legislation, this is a compromise piece. I think it's important to know that it's only for the 2020 election. So it gives us the opportunity to see what an expanded vote by mail program will look like, how effective it was to mail out just the applications, and to see what kind of return and response we get. At the same time, the House Democratic women have a pretty strong caucus. They meet together on a regular basis. They really wanted to see, as one of their contributions to this bill, that it become a state holiday. And I hadn't really considered that initially, but it makes sense in that one of the problems we have with Election Day is the polling places. And I'm sure, you're all involved in Election Day activities and are probably election judges or poll watchers. More and more schools don't want to be polling sites. And I totally appreciate that. And in fact, I actually drafted a bill to say that you couldn't force a school to do that. It's a safety issue, with the amount of strangers that are in and out of public buildings with the kids in at the same time. But now it's got another safety issue, which is a health issue of people wandering in and out of a public building, possibly, infecting kids. So having a state holiday that would include our schools really opens up all of those community-based centers, all of those schools that everybody kind of knows where their local grade school is. Opens that up to make, greater availability for that. Another piece that is, we don't talk about it a lot, but which I think is really an important and exciting piece, is having 16-year-olds be eligible to be election judges. You know as well as I do that technology has really changed how we process a voter from the time they walk in the room and until that their ballot has been actually put into the voting machine and processed. Sometimes for a retired election judge, and sometimes, and I can relate to this, the older you get, the harder it is to learn some of these things. It's become a little bit more of a challenge. That plus the fear that so many of our older election judges had during the primary about being exposed. And again, I think that's a totally legitimate concern, and I think it's well-founded. So this brings us a whole new pool of young people, 16, 17, 18 years old, to be election judges. And besides the obvious benefits of providing more manpower, what a great way to engage young people, to bring them in, actually have them on the ground working on election day. And I'm hoping that we can actually capture a lot of young people. They won't be in school. They get experience like, sorry, I had a call coming in there. Great experience. So I'm hoping that this is something that is just another added piece to vote by mail. It did end up being somewhat controversial. There was extended debate on both the House and the Senate floor, and it was basically a partisan issue. The Republicans really were not in favor of this. They had a lot of concerns, a lot of issues. One of the technical pieces that I think makes this bill really good is when the ballot actually is mailed and goes, let's say, to the county clerk. And last year, when the county clerk would get that ballot in the mail, it would be an employee of the clerk's office that actually would get the envelope, open it. Yes, that looks right. That's a signature, and put it in and process it. Now that won't be the way it goes. Now we're going to have 3 election judges, actual election judges who will be appointed by the clerk. And again, these are individuals that the Democrat and the Republican parties recommend to the clerk's office. They'll be trained election judges, and they will come in on an as-needed basis. The clerk would determine that to open on sort of a rolling schedule as those ballots come in. 3 sets of eyes, a bipartisan group of 3, will look at each ballot to verify that it is in fact, proper and it's been signed and the signatures match, all that. The bill requires a 48-hour notice period should there be a fatal flaw, and that's very well spelled out in the bill. 48 hours to contact the voter and say, please, you need to cure your ballot. You need to, and they would describe what it needs to happen. So I think there's a lot of built-in things that are going to be extra security and should give people more confidence than they had previously for vote by mail. So that was vote by mail. That was a huge piece that we did. We did do other things this spring. Obviously, the budget was paramount. Again, another really unusual situation where our revenues are going to be greatly lower than last year and than what we needed. So the governor had already introduced his budget. We cut over $1 billion out of his proposed budget, but have what I consider to be a preservation budget, something that doesn't cut any of the essential services that we need. Everything was pretty much held flat, as was last year's funding, with the exception of in human services. We saw a 20% increase in DCFS. And I think maybe a lot of you know that's been the horse I've been riding for a long time. I don't think there's another agency that is been more poorly managed, nor, that really deserves and needs funding and better operations. So I'm hoping that that money is going to be well spent, and I intend to really watch how those dollars are spent and make sure they go to the right places. Also with COVID-19, there was a lot of funding to make sure that grants and funding streams were put in place to help people in the emergency times they were in, whether it was a business interruption grant or unemployment. I can tell you that my office, and I talked to them this morning, everyone's working remotely still, has become like a little mini Illinois Department of Employment Security station. We have had hundreds of people call our office with difficulty with IDES, applying for unemployment benefits, being knocked off the list, not getting calls back, having their passwords changed, not being able to verify. And these were people, and as you know, it's a huge number of people in Illinois who qualify, who deserve, and who are entitled to these dollars right now. So my office has basically transitioned into employment security and unemployment help for people. So if you know anybody, even if they're not in the district, have them call my office. My staff is really, really well trained. They get to the bottom of things, and they solve just about every case that comes in front of them because they know who to call and how to get it done. So that's just sort of a little aside. But call my Deerfield office, and they're more than happy to help. You know, in terms of the budget, a couple other things that I think are important. We appropriated $32 million for immigration services, an extra $32 million, and some COVID-19 relief for those folks who are not going to be eligible due to their immigration status to get any help from the federal government. We thought that was important. They're part of our community, but they've been totally shut out of all those resources. And then mental health, which we mentioned a little bit earlier. Gosh, the seclusion, the isolation, the disconnection from work and family and friends and social life and all the other supports that I think we kind of take for granted has taken a toll on people. So there is an additional $30 million in this year's budget for mental health and substance abuse services. To balance the budget, we authorized, and this is a huge number, but this is an authorization, $5 billion. If we are that short, and we didn't have firm numbers, to borrow from the Federal Reserve. And we won't really know where we are, I don't think, for a few months, but we didn't want any program being drastically cut or services not being able to be provided that were really essential because we had literally run out of money. So this was something the federal government made available to all the states. The General Assembly had to take action to authorize it. And we should have a better idea when we go back for veto what our actual shortcoming is going to be and how much we'll have to look at borrowing. So that is kind of a thumbnail sketch of what happened while we were there for 4 whole days in May and did 40 days worth of work. So I'm happy to do questions or whatever you guys would like.
Thank you, Senator Morrison. We do have some questions that were submitted in advance. And I appreciate the summary you've given us so far, and probably this is not the best time to be considering this, but one of the questions related to money and finances is what steps can be taken to improve the state's bond rating?
Probably, you know, right now, having a balanced budget, paying the full load of our pension costs, which we did this year, despite the fact that we are desperately short on the revenues we projected. I think those are all things that help to steady ourselves a little bit.
Great. Now, what about the Clean Energy Jobs Act?
So the Clean Energy Jobs Act, we didn't even really talk about it this spring, honestly. It's been kind of sitting on a shelf waiting for action. I'm a co-sponsor on it because there's just so many merits to what the bill has in it. I do believe that by 2050, we should be 100% renewable on our energy costs, and that we need to jump in with both feet to reduce our carbon footprint. I hate to say feet and footprints, but no, I mean, that's something that absolutely has to be done. I don't know for sure if that's going to be taken up in the fall. I don't think there's especially consensus yet. Still some questions. I know that there's a hesitation on some people. We don't want to bail out the big utility companies again. So I think that's something when the bill actually comes for a final vote that I'm going to be looking at very carefully to make sure there's nothing that's been amended into it to bail out, you know, Exelon or any other big corporation, unless we're all really, really aware of it and want that to happen.
Thank you. The next question has to do with Fix the Floyd. What steps are you taking right now regarding gun violence prevention?
So Fix the Void is my bill, and I had really hoped that we'd be able to call it in the spring. Obviously, we had to have very select number of bills that we could pass. Fix the Void, I honestly didn't have the 30 votes that I needed, to be honest with you. It passed the House. I needed 30 votes out of 59, and beg, borrow, steal, scrape, grovel, I couldn't get 30 votes. And then March came, and lo and behold, it wasn't going to be taken up. That bill could be taken up in veto, but would require 36 votes now. Now that will be after the election. So will some people change their mind once the election is over? I don't know. Probably, most likely, this will happen during lame duck. When, and I imagine this lame duck will be a wild and woolly one, because we have a lot of bills that are pent up that need to have action taken on. Anything that was a little bit of controversy, now during lame duck in January, before the new General Assembly takes office, that reverts back to only 30 votes out of 59. So that is my best guess when I will push really hard to get that bill passed. But I think, with all the gun violence that continues to riddle our state, and this is, I think, very, not simple, but I think it's a very straightforward approach. That should help just in a lot of different cases.
Thank you. Related to that, do you think that legislation will pass allowing home rule communities to adopt ordinances regulating firearms?
I honestly don't. I haven't heard that discussed in a lot of detail yet by any of the advocates. It might get legs, but I'll tell you right now, we are really staying very singularly laser focused on getting Fix the Void passed, and hate to dilute any of our energy or direction until we get that bill on the governor's desk.
Thank you. Now regarding the Fair Maps Amendment, since it won't be on the ballot in the fall, what legislation could be passed to improve the redistricting process?
So I was the original sponsor of that constitutional amendment a couple of years ago, and we just could not get the oomph behind it that we needed to even get a committee vote on it. It's very frustrating. Because it didn't pass and it will not be on the ballot, there are still some measures I think we can take. We might still have the same format and the same people making the decision on the maps, but we have technology now. For example, I believe that drafts of those maps should be made public, they should be online, and that people like you and I and any other concerned citizen should have access to those and be able to provide testimony, either written or electronic, to weigh in on their concerns as these maps are drawn. This shouldn't be something that happens, in a locked room with a bunch of leadership people who come out and say, and here is your map, and this is what it's going to be. We have the ability now to be much broader, much more informed, and we have a really engaged, I think it's something like 80% of the people in the state want to have the ability to have fair maps. Unfortunately, we're not going to get it through legislation, but I think we can force the hand of the decision makers a little bit by opening this up publicly.
Thank you. Circling back to pensions, is there any activity, any effort right now going on to fix the pension system in the state of Illinois?
Honestly, this was something we didn't get into this session. And we were just there for so few days. We're making the full pension payment. There was last year we did consolidate fire and police districts pensions, which long-term should save some money, that those will be local dollars as opposed to state dollars. But no, we just didn't.
Thank you. What about the consolidation of government entities? Has there been any activity in that arena?
Again, a lot of discussion, a lot of good thoughts, nothing substantive. No legislation really advanced. I know now locally in Lake County, there will be the opportunity to consolidate, I believe, the clerk, 2 offices in the county clerk, in the clerk's office, the county office. I can think of the people, but I can't think of their titles. I'm sorry.
I think it's the recorder.
Right. Recorder of deeds. Yeah. So we have the opportunity actually to do that. Township government, I think, even though I worked there 15 years, I see as something that is and should be on the chopping block, that because of the way our communities have evolved, that every county should have the opportunity to more easily dissolve that form of government and place those services with municipalities or the county. The townships in Illinois have a huge lobby. I mean, and they have a lot of political clout, especially downstate. So that again hasn't been anything we've been able to do, but I think there are some good considerations.
Great, thank you. Now, here's a question regarding environmental concerns. Probably in the context of COVID, this is not going to make a lot of sense right now, but what about single-use plastics? Many municipalities and even states are considering the banning of single-use plastics like styrofoam cups and takeout containers and things like that. Certainly during COVID times when we're reliant on takeout and carryout, that seems like something that would be more challenging to push through. But is that something that we are considering at a state level?
Oh, absolutely. The Environmental Council of Illinois worked with several of us legislators and developed a package of bills that deal with plastics. Microplastics in particular have a devastating effect, though we don't actually, it's not something you pick up off the beach necessarily, devastating effect on our water supply. As I really thought about how could we start taking some concrete action, I drafted a bill that says that the state of Illinois would not purchase, and we're a big purchaser because we don't just buy for the Capitol, we buy for state parks, we buy for corrections, we buy for hospitals, we buy for all the universities. We're a big purchaser. I thought if we could demonstrate as a purchaser that we weren't going to buy those single-use plastics, that would be a great demonstration, a way to lead by example and encourage corporations and just really change the whole fabric of how we think about plastics. That bill's drafted. That bill didn't get through committee because we didn't have the Environment Committee meet to take it up. That's something I'm definitely going to push very hard next year. We had the universities had bought in on this. There were a couple exceptions even before COVID, like some of the corrections folks they had to have some plastics, and in the hospital setting, obviously for some health concerns, had to have some exceptions. But when I look at people like McDonald's, who, if they can serve your Big Mac in a little piece of folded up cardboard, why can't the rest of us, and why are we using plastic straws? And so everything that the state would purchase in terms of food service. And I started there rather than making it so big and so encompassing that we could never meet, though it's food service to start with. So stay tuned for that. I think there will be support for that.
Thank you. Now let's switch to criminal justice issues. One of our attendees has pinpointed that currently the felony threshold for retail theft is $300. Is there a more appropriate amount?
There is legislation that raises that to $2,000. I honestly was hoping to hear, if it's appropriate, I'd like to hear from some of your members on that. Their feeling, if that is appropriate. You know, this legislation that's been proposed would also only if you had a previous conviction of a felony rather than just the theft offense for the enhanced penalty. So I guess I would just be interested. I think I'm going to be able to support this bill because I think we need to do something. But I haven't talked to anybody from the district about it, and I thought maybe some of you would like to weigh in.
You may unmute yourselves if you have something to say about this issue, everybody.
Maybe I'll start. I guess I would look at Senator Morrison, the impact in terms of the way the policing happens. The impetus for a retail theft arrest can be harassment or profiling. And I would look at the incidents that have occurred within your district and try to get a sense of what the motivating force for the arrest was, and was there a prior conviction? Was it in connection with a larger crime, some violent incident or something like that? But I guess what I'm trying to say is, in making this decision, I would look at a greater context rather than just black or white, 300 versus 2,000.
Okay. And I guess I'm curious as to whether or not people of color are more, I'm assuming, but I guess I haven't seen the statistics, are more likely to have these kind of offenses charged. So, anybody else? Well, if you think of anything, you know, after we're done today, don't hesitate to pick up the phone and call my office, leave me a voicemail, shoot me an email, and just say, you know, I thought about this, here's another consideration. So, but thank you.
Thank you, Senator Morrison.
Yeah.
Now, talking about, you mentioned some of the budgetary concerns for immigrant families. Let's talk about the approach in allowing ICE to enter schools and other places like that. So do you support legislation to protect immigrant families from federal immigration enforcement by empowering schools, medical facilities, and courthouses to turn away ICE agents and to restrict cooperation with ICE?
Yeah, I absolutely support that. I know that there are people who actually, parents who have made contingency plans in the event that someday they don't come home, they get picked up, who's going to take care of their minor children? I mean, that's a terrible way to live. That's an awful way to live. And those are people who have been part of our communities for years and years and have jobs, and our kids all go to school together. But because of that status, you know, there's great concern. One thing we did pass this spring was to provide medical care and assistance for undocumented seniors over 65. So now I think we take it for granted, being U.S. citizens, that, you know, Medicare will be there for us. But that's not true for older people. This is Illinois dollars. There's no federal money in this because the federal government won't subsidize this care for undocumented. But the state felt it was important to take care of some of our older, more vulnerable residents. And so there is money set aside in Senate Bill 1864 for that.
Thank you. It seems that millions are out of work right now and consequently without health insurance. Is there anything that's being done I know you mentioned some specific applications for mental health and things like that, but is there anything being done on the subject of unemployment and health insurance for the millions left without employment due to COVID-19?
I can tell you that I have colleagues in the Senate who are meeting this summer to look at ways to expand and protect some of the different coverages that exist. I think we've seen such a huge reliance on those insurance policies that we need to make sure we keep those in place and maybe expand kind of a Medicaid for all kind of thing, more of a universal approach. I know they're looking at the viability of that for Illinois this summer.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Related to that, should the Affordable Housing Planning and Appeal Act, should that apply to home rule communities?
I think it should, but I don't know if we're going to be able to get that done. You know, affordable housing, we have seen just even recently in Deerfield, real challenges within the community to bring affordable housing in actually a small number of units, sort of not in my backyard kind of mentality, which makes me sad. Yeah, we need to do a better job of creating more affordable housing for people across the board, and especially as we've just had Black Lives Matter rallies and discussions, and you know, the activation that's come about from that. A lot of it comes back to affordable housing and integrating our communities better and making everybody feel welcome. And I think there are a lot of communities that there's a lot of room to improve that. So we need to kind of put our money where our mouth is on this. And it's nice to say, yes, we care and Black Lives Matter. And you know what? We want you to live in our community and we want you to feel comfortable and included. And that's the next step.
Thank you. Another attendee would like to know if you support a carbon tax.
A what tax?
Carbon tax?
A condom tax.
No, carbon.
Sorry, where is my mind? I'm not hearing what you're saying.
Carbon. C-A-R-B-O-N, carbon.
Oh, carbon. Carbon. Oh my gosh. Yeah, but I don't, you know, I'll be honest, I haven't looked at that carefully enough. It sounds good. I've heard a lot of environmentalists talk about it. We should, you know, with CEJA, we should be able to roll things back. But if we can't, there should be some penalties. I don't really know enough about the particulars to really give you a really good answer. I'm sorry.
That's okay. You've done great so far. I'm of knowledge. And about that condom tax, I wouldn't recommend it.
I'm sorry. Melinda Bush has carried, you know, Melinda Bush has carried so many feminine hygiene product bills that dealt with taking the taxes away from like products that women use. And I guess that's what I thought the person was asking about. Sorry.
That would be an interesting question, though. You have to
So the next time you guys have one of these interviews, ask that representative or senator.
I will. That's a good idea.
Yeah, see if they're paying attention.
Thank you. How about this question? How do you intend to help Illinois keep its promise to improve school funding continually under the evidence-based funding law, which is intended to end years of inequitable funding?
So this policy started a couple of years ago, and it requires $350 million extra be put in each year. The easiest thing is just to continue to vote for the budget and make sure that that is included in there. So, you know, it's so many schools in our district rely so heavily on property taxes. And they don't, I don't know, I think about some of the schools that are probably represented here, you know, that $350 million, there's tiny, tiny pieces and threads that come to those districts and those schools because they have such a strong tax base, such a strong EAV, that they're able to fund their schools to, you know, to the degree that they need to. It's the schools that don't, and you don't have to look too far. North Chicago, Wheeling, there are communities that really rely upon that increase that we've put in statute now. So we just have to keep making sure we don't make an exception and say, oh, it's a bad year, we can't afford the $350 million. No, it's just part of what we do.
Thank you. Now back to education. What steps should the legislature take to address the teacher shortage in Illinois?
Well, you know, workforce recruitment and retention for teachers. I know that fewer and fewer people, they say, are going into the teaching profession because, I mean, one of the reasons was when we did, we changed the pension ladders, if you would, so that new people, new teachers going in after 2011 were part of tier 2. And that was, you know, a much, much lower payout, if you would, than tier 1 teachers. So that's been one of the things. I think one of the things we can do is, you know, maybe look at ways that we can start in high school, asking, you know, starting to encourage kids in high school to consider a teaching profession. I think a lot of kids get ideas about they want to be doctors, they want to be lawyers, they want to be this and that. And if there's a way that we can assist teachers in communities where there is a great shortage, you know, make up some, you know, help to subsidize some of their student loans, that type of thing. But everything takes money, you know, and we're just kind of not in a position to have a lot of new programs for that right now.
Thank you, Senator Morrison. Our time is almost up, but I have one last question for you. What are going to be your top 3 priorities in the next session?
Well, let's assume that Fix the Void gets passed. I'm going to look at the plastics legislation, which is something I really want to push through. I've been working, speaking of teacher enhancement and retraining and recruiting, our child welfare workforce is diminishing. And I think that's one of the problems that DCFS has. So I am trying to, and I'm actually working with the task force this summer to come up with ways to encourage people to get a BSW, an MSW, and then to stay in that profession and that track to work with kids. We need the more experienced teachers. We need the more experienced social workers and case managers to deal with some of these families that are really in a precarious position, especially when we take the kids out of the house. And then I guess the third issue, I guess, would be to sort of redirect our budget. Hopefully next year we will be bouncing back, and we're going to need to look at ways to restructure some of the debt perhaps. We're going to have a $5 billion, could be up to $5 billion that we borrowed. We need to think long and hard about how we are going to reconfigure our finances. So, and you know, I'm going to put one more in there, and that is ethics for the General Assembly. It's time the General Assembly stepped up and monitored itself and had a better ethics package and more transparency. And, you know, so I could go another half an hour on that. with you guys, but it's really time that the General Assembly quit hiding behind some of the antiquated rules and procedures that we have. People need to know who is subsidizing, who is contributing, how that happens. Am I a member of a board of a hospital that I then turn around and vote for? There's just not enough disclosure. Conflicts of interest, we don't like to talk about that because it is a conflict of interest, but we should be absolutely required to declare those and let the voters decide based upon that disclosure. So.
Thank you very much, Senator Morrison. I particularly appreciate your final comments about ethics and taking a look at your own body. And I do think that if our members and board warrant it, it's a good topic to explore in the future and would warrant some greater depth. We're very grateful for your presence here today. And I was wondering, before we sign off, if you could state out loud your office telephone number and email contact address, so if people have further questions, they can follow up with your office. We really
Sure. The number is 847-945-5200. And somebody picks that up 9 to 5. They just don't happen to be sitting at their desk right now. The email is IL and the word Senate, SENATE, the number 29, ilsenate29@gmail. And that's the one I read, and my entire staff does too. So that's our good general email that goes to everybody. And don't forget, seriously, if you have ID, unemployment questions, problems, suggestions, call and let us know. We are really trying to troubleshoot for people at this time.
We appreciate your outreach to the community in that. And thank you for being here. To everybody who participated in the call, thank you for your questions, for your participation on a busy summer day. We hope to hold more programs like this over the summer, so please stay tuned, check your email, check our website, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. See you in my office next year.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.